Hello there and welcome. Now, in April 2024, I made a drawing based on an old photograph of a horse bus in the Old Kent Road, which is actually on the next page from the one I'm showing you. And this set me off on a train of thought, which led me to challenge myself to make drawings of every property, station, and utility on the traditional London Monopoly board. Oh, what's not to like? I love drawing, I love London, and yeah, I love Monopoly. So, Monopoly was officially invented by an American called Charles Darrow in the mid 1930s. I say officially because it actually bore some remarkable similarities to a game called the Landlord game, which was invented a couple of decades earlier by a lady called Elizabeth McGee. Originally, Parker Brothers, when presented with the game, rejected it because of what it claimed were its 52 fundamental errors. But then the boss, a man called Robert Barton, actually got round to playing the game for himself. Now he was hooked, and Mr. Darrow was invited back into the office. He signed on the dotted line and could then sit back and watch the money roll in for the rest of his life. Now, Monopoly's original American board has properties in Atlantic City, New Jersey. In the spring of 1935, the managing director of John Waddington's, a printing firm in the UK who diversified into playing cards in the 20s and board games even more recently than that, the managing director was a man named Victor Watson. He'd worked his way up from being a printer to running the whole firm. He'd received a Monopoly set from Parker Brothers in the USA. Victor gave the set to his son, Norman, and asked him to play and let him know what he thought about it. Playing a game against himself, Norman spent a whole weekend, by the end of which he was absolutely hooked. So Vic ran Robert Barton of Parker Brothers and secured the European and British Empire rights. I think it was a smart decision Waddington's made not to change anything about the original game that didn't need changing. In fact, they didn't even change some things that they could well have changed. The cop on Go to Jail, for example, looks far more New York than he looks London. The original American locomotives on the stations were replaced with more distinctly British ones, but the car on free parking remains distinctly American, white wall tyre and all. However, the currency of the game had to be changed to sterling, and the names of the properties had to be changed. Bearing in mind the fact that the Waddington's board would be the standard set for Europe and the Empire for the foreseeable future, then it made sense to use London locations, being as those outside the UK would probably at least be aware of London. So, what remained was to decide upon the London properties and stations for the Waddington set. "Leave it to your old man," said Victor to Leeds. Victor to Norman, and he and his secretary Marjorie Phillips set off boldly from their Leeds HQ to scout out locations. Their lack of familiarity with the capital seems evident in some of the unusual choices they made. Now, it's at this point I'd like to point you in the direction of this book, Do Not Pass Go by Tim Moore. Tim Moore's probably my favourite travel writer, and it's a very funny and interesting book. He discusses what may have made Vic and Marge settle on the choices that they did, and also talks about what you might learn about London from visiting each of the properties today. Now, 8 of the videos, including this one, are going to focus on the colour sets and show you the sketches I've made. Many of them show the property over 100 years ago, although some feature much more recent scenes. One video is going to focus on the stations, and the last video will have the 2 utilities, jail, go to jail, and free parking. For fairly obvious reasons, I haven't been able to make sketches for Chance, Community Chest, or Go. So if you're ready, we'll start by going back to Old Kent Road. So, the Old Kent Road is the only property on the London Monopoly board which is south of the River Thames. It goes through many changes of name, but the Old Kent Road is a particularly appropriate one since A, the road's old, and B, it goes through Kent. If you follow it, then it takes you all the way to Dover. I know, because I cycled all the way as far as Canterbury in a day once. Nearly bloody killed me. Old Kent Road is part of Watling Street, the ancient Roman road from London to Dover, and this in itself was built on an ancient Celtic trackway. Old Kent Road was home to the venerable Thomas a Becket pub, which stood where Chaucer and his pilgrims make their first stop in the pilgrimage to Canterbury in the Canterbury Tales. And the first floor of the Thomas a Becket housed a boxing gym. Sir Henry Cooper made it famous by training there for many of his fights, and he wasn't the only one. Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, and Sugar Ray Leonard all sparred there at one time or another. Other famous hostelries along the Old Kent Road have included The World Turned Upside Down, and that intriguing name may have referenced the discovery of Australia. Other literary heroes used the Old Kent Road, including Dickens's David Copperfield, who runs along the Old Kent Road in his escape from Salem House School. Nearly said slalom. Did say slalom. Salem House School en route to Dover to find his Aunt Betsy Trotwood. It's also appropriate that this first property, the Old Kent Road, is also the first property we encounter that's also the subject of a music hall song. Knocked 'em in the Old Kent Road is the song in question. In line with many music hall songs, it tells an unlikely story about a poor man's wife being visited by a toff who tells her that her Uncle Tom has passed away and left her a donkey and cart in his will. Oh, they don't write them like that anymore. So the Brown set is very much the low end of the market. So the boss property of the Brown set is Whitechapel. It's the cheapest property, which is north of the River Thames, and it's also the only one in the East End of London. As I'm sure you know, the East End is the area east of the City of London and the city walls, and traditionally it was associated with docks from when London was one of the world's great commercial ports. The East End was also associated with poverty, crime and political activism. As for the name, well, Whitechapel took its name from the medieval chapel of St Mary Mapthelon, which was whitewashed to give it an attractive appearance. I do have a family connection with the area. My great-grandmother, Sarah Emily Rainbow, was from a family of Coventry silk weavers, all descended from one William Rainbow, a silk-weaving Huguenot who took refuge in Spitalfields in the 17th century. So the name Whitechapel might well make you think of the Whitechapel murders, the atrocities committed in the area by the individual known as Jack the Ripper. However, Whitechapel was also home to the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, one of the oldest commercial businesses in the UK until its 2017 closure. You can argue that the two most famous bells in the world are Philadelphia's Liberty Bell and London's Big Ben, and they were certainly both cast in Whitechapel. Despite the connotations that the name brings nowadays, Whitechapel was a thriving area in the 1930s when Victor Watson and loyal Secretary Marge were on their mission, a down-market version of Oxford Street and a thriving commercial area. It'd be interesting to whisk the two of them forward in a time machine and see what they would have made of the area's 60s association with London gangsterism through the Blind Beggar pub and the semi-legendary Cray twins. Well, that's the end of our first video, and next time we're going to look at the light blues. So we're going up in the world, if only slightly. Hopefully see you then.